Hey you guys, welcome to the Freedom to Flourish podcast. Dr. Joel Miller here with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Tim Augustiniak. We're going to talk about some nutrition today. We're going to try to get into a number of things, really starting with kind of a general overview of nutrition, talking about what it is, talking about really the purpose of it. We'll get into some of the basic understandings. We're going to talk about some of the macronutrients, micronutrients. Eventually, we'll go through kind of our own nutrition, Dr. Tim and I's own nutrition, and really what we'll eat throughout the day. We'll talk kind of about, our thought process when we're looking at foods and kind of deciding what to eat as well. And then we're going to get into some other good things too. We're going to talk about really the foods that you need to have in your nutrition. We're going to talk about what you should absolutely be avoiding. And I think this is going to be really, really, really helpful, Dr. Tim, for the listeners, because nutrition is so important. Dr. Tim, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you. Happy to be here today. Good morning, afternoon, good evening, whatever time our listeners are listening at. It's morning for us right now, so I'll roll with good morning. But yeah, nutrition is very, very, very important. Most people don't really think beyond, protein, fat, and carbs. And today we're really going to get into the nitty gritty of why various micronutrients, various ways of eating are so important, as well as getting into why you need to kind of change your frame of thought regarding food a lot of times. Where
Huge.
before we even hopped on today, we were kind of going over our outline that we put together. Dr. Joel, you mentioned like granola bars, for example. Like we look at our Nature Valley, really awesome, tasty peanut granola bars that
Protein,
we think they're
air
so
quotes.
healthy, but they're full of all kinds of inflammatory seed oils, added sugars, things like that. Where things are very often marketed as being healthy, but health isn't necessarily what people are trying to sell you. And so we're gonna kind of cover how you can change your thought process on what is healthy and what exactly your body needs nutritionally, and how to get that through whole foods and things that don't necessarily need to be marketed as healthy. I mean, you don't go to the grocery store and see somebody trying to give out samples for just apples or just ground beef or something like that. It's always some new product that's all processed that they're trying to sell you. And so um, with that, we're just going to cover how to eat healthy and the strategies to do so. So the first thing that we're really going to get into today is essentially just the absolute basics of nutrition. Where what exactly is nutrition? So what components, if you look at the back of the label, what components will you see on there? And so the three things that you'll really pay attention to, I mean, there's calories for sure. Those are important, but we mainly are concerned with the macronutrients, like your protein, fat, and carbs. Your micronutrients are your various vitamins, minerals, all those things that are in food, as well as the fiber. Those are the three big things that you'll see on those labels, beyond just ingredients, calories, all those things. And so with macronutrients, that's your protein, fat, and carbs. And so one of the big components that we're going to talk about today is really good sources for all those macronutrients. Whenever we look at diet, or not dieting, but just nutrition in general, that's honestly one of the biggest things that we'll look at, is making sure that you're eating enough throughout the day to make sure that you are fine tuning your health to yourself. I mean, we've harped on blood sugar in the past, and our some opinions in passing regarding fasting and all those things. But when we're making sure that we're eating enough, the macronutrients are what are going to provide the calories. So protein and carbs specifically, they're going to provide 4 calories per gram. And then fats, they actually provide 9 calories per gram. And so if you're trying to do some math, just utilizing that knowledge, that's what will provide your calories at that point. So when it comes to micronutrients, that's where we get into things like your vitamins, your minerals, your zinc, your magnesium, your sodium, your vitamins, your cereal that's fortified with, folic acid and iron and all these things, or even iodized salt, all this stuff. Where over the last, couple hundred years, people have realized that certain foods or certain areas, you're naturally deficient in certain things. So that's where those nutrients come in, where you have to look past the macronutrients a lot of times and really understand what sort of micronutrients come from food, because there's some people that if they've got a big stress issue going on, they're going to be run down on some things like magnesium, zinc, vitamin B6. Um, somebody who's you know pumping a whole lot of or trying to push testosterone, like men with low testosterone, like zinc, very, very important for that. And so various things that should come from your food that you should probably know, okay, this is what component that is. Um, and then the last thing is fiber. So fiber is essentially indigestible starches that are found in foods that your microbiome essentially will interact with and produce or digest, and then produce certain vitamins or essential fatty acids that our body doesn't normally produce on its own. And so there should be that symbiotic relationship where fiber and various components of food are able to provide that for us through the microbiome. And so whenever you look on your label and you see fiber, that's essentially what fiber is. So hopefully that was quick and concise enough.
Yeah, that's great.
Little overview of those. Anything that you would add to that, Dr. Joel?
No, that's great. I mean, one of the things, Dr. Tim, that, we harp on all the time with our patients and of course with ourselves, that we've adapted this, it's become so natural and normal for us, is what you mentioned as far as kind of understanding how to read the labels on foods. And one of the things that happens with people is we become so kind of naive to what's actually in the foods, and we kind of look at the marketing, and marketing is, holy smokes, it's just a multi-million billion-dollar industry that's kind of backing the whole food industry. And so essentially you look, for example, at a protein bar. We'll go back to kind of like the granola protein bars, and you look at the ingredients, and it's like the first ingredient is like soy isolate protein. And you and I both know, not only is that a terrible form of protein that the body's not really going to to use to a high capacity, it's also got estrogenic effects, and then there's also going to be some inflammatory seed oils following that, and sugar, and it's all processed stuff. It's all really just unhealthy stuff. Yet the marketing and everything looks healthy. So we're going to talk about some key nutrients. We're going to touch on a couple different topics here in a second that are really important. But once we get to, for the listener here, once we get to these key things to avoid, these are going to be, the whole list is going to be so important to understand. When you're reading through the labels, like, you have to understand what's in these foods. I mean, we should be understanding what we're putting in our body, and really just take hold of that, kind of take it by the horns, and that kind of thing. So just really understanding that is huge. And when you talk about the macronutrients and micronutrients, I think you did a great job explaining all that. So that's wonderful. So Dr. Tim, we talk about protein a lot, and protein is really, really important. Let's jump into protein, fats, carbs. Let's talk a little bit about the benefits of each one and how our listeners should kind of be thinking about each one. And then maybe share just some of our top sources that we try to eat every day. Obviously, Dr. Tim, with protein, we talk a lot about the importance of protein to help balance and stabilize blood sugar. And then I know for my patients, I'm usually recommending guys get like 100 grams of protein a day. Women get at least 75. And of course, depending on the demand and their lifestyle, that those numbers may be more, depending on if, where they're at now. If they're eating like 10 grams of protein a day, I'm usually like, all right, let's start with 50. Let's start somewhere kind of basic there, and just try to get them going a little bit. But as far as protein, how do you think of protein, and what might you share with the listener that you think is just really helpful to kind of know as we kind of talk about protein here?
I mainly just touch on protein as understanding that, yes, it has the effect of satiating you between meals more so than just carbs. That's also the fat component, but
Right.
it is the building block for the overwhelming majority of all the tissues in your body.
Yeah.
So if you are sick, you need more protein. If you're training or exercising, you need more protein because there's tissue breakdown. If you have a gut issue and you're chronically inflamed in your gut and you're breaking down tissue in there, you need protein. And so one of the biggest things I try to convey to my patients is the demand for protein goes so much beyond fulfilling your hunger, or satiating your hunger. It's providing your body with what it needs to fix itself. And so it's important beyond what most people realize.
Totally. One thing I'll add to that too is there are some patients that will come in and we'll talk about protein, and protein it causes them symptoms. I know there's one gentleman where he's diabetic, but protein would actually spike his blood sugar a little bit. I've had some patients that just kind of feel gross when they eat protein. And to the listener, that really goes back to a methylation issue where there's usually a magnesium deficiency where you're not breaking down methionine. That's just something I've kind of seen, Dr. Tim. It's been really, really helpful for people. So obviously with protein, you need to have good, healthy stomach acid levels to start digesting it and breaking it down. Otherwise, that can result in a lot of indigestion and so forth. So Dr. Tim, what are some of your favorite sources of protein, and what does that look like kind of in your life?
Of course, I'll always go back to whole foods. So where you get your organic grass-fed beef or steak or whatever you want to do there. Beef is great. Organic chicken, great. Turkey, pork, you name it. I mean, as long as it's a meat, I'm typically a pretty big fan of it. As long as you try to get good sourced organic meats, those are going to be the best, most bioavailable proteins that you can possibly eat. Plant proteins are incomplete, so they don't contain all the essential amino acids that our bodies need to make up protein within our body. And so I always encourage people to go towards organic meats. Eggs are phenomenal. Dairy's great. One of the biggest questions I get asked is protein powder okay? And the answer to that is, in my opinion, yeah. Yeah, as long as you're getting a good quality protein powder that's not full of all kinds of garbage, and it's not like drinking the milk after your bowl of Fruity Pebbles, those crazy flavored ones. They are good. If you're getting just a good quality grass-fed whey protein, it's not going to taste as good, but at the same time, it's going to provide you with the protein that you need. It's going to be clean. It's going to be really good for you. So with patients specifically that have issues with, say, hunger in the morning, where they just don't feel hungry and they feel gross, like they shouldn't be eating in the morning, a big component of that is training yourself to enter this survival state where you'll be stressed first thing in the morning, which downregulates the hunger. But in order to break that, eating a little bit or even drinking a meal is a solution. And so with breakfast in particular, I will very often recommend things like protein powders. So then that way it just makes it more convenient for patients to get the proper macronutrients and break that survival state and enter that thrival state in regulating the blood sugar sufficiently. So those are the big ones. I'm not huge on plant proteins. Anything that comes from an animal and is a sourced, organic source of it, it should be good to go. That's my motto there.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a really big word, and that's the bioavailability, which you can actually, to the listener, you can look this up. Look up, search something along the lines of bioavailable proteins, and you can search list or something like that. And there's actually some scales, some lists that have been put together that actually show you, based on the protein, how much of it is bioavailable from the source. And you'll see exactly what Dr. Tim just mentioned. You'll see that if it's a plant-based protein, that there's a low bioavailability, which means even though you might be getting 20 grams of protein, for example, your body is only really using and absorbing maybe 7 to 10 grams of protein. Of course, it depends on the source, but that's kind of what we're talking about. Whereas when we look at things like the grass-fed beef, when we look at the grass-fed whey protein shake, when we look at the pasture-raised chicken and so forth, those proteins are going to have a way higher bioavailability, which means your body's going to absorb it better, it's going to use it better, and it's going to just overall going to be way more nutrient dense. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, Dr. Tim. Another thing occurred to me too. I don't know if our listeners know this, but you mentioned protein's really good for our immune system. Well, with our immune system cells, we call them immunoglobulins. That's what they're called, immunoglobulins. Immuno, obviously meaning like immune system, and then globulins, those are protein. That's protein that makes up those cells. And so sometimes people that just have a weak immune system, they need more protein. So Dr. Tim, I think that's a great point. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Some of the other foods that, yeah, you mentioned it, the best there, with all the proteins, really focusing on animal sources is going to be the best. And then of course we talk about quality all the time, trying to get grass-fed stuff, pasture-raised stuff, organic as best as possible. And then of course local is usually going to be best. Fats. Let's talk about fats a little bit. When I think of fats, Dr. Tim, there's obviously a lot of healthy nutrients in fats, right? Like our grass-fed butter is going to be full of arachidonic acid. That helps our immune system. That helps with, we'll talk here just a second about fatty acid imbalances, right? And the omega-3s and omega-6s and all that good stuff. But then you have a lot of just anti-inflammatory nutrients in things like olive oil and things like that. So when I think of fats, I think of the nutrients that are in them and how those support our system. But then I also think of fats are going to be a great source of calories. Like you mentioned, they're going to be way more calorically dense than protein and carbs. And so as far as getting in your calories, making sure you have enough calories for all the work that you do throughout the day, I think of fats as a really good thing there. So Dr. Tim, what else with fats would you kind of add to that topic?
The biggest thing that it may be perceived as a little taboo to our listeners, looking for health advice regarding fats. So one of the most important nutrients that you'll get from animal fats is cholesterol. So cholesterol, whenever anybody comes into the office and they're worried about the cholesterol, and then I tell them, okay, you need to eat beef, you need to, have dairy, all these things. They're like, well, won't that make my cholesterol go high? Well, cholesterol, I often talk about it as like a currency within your body, where if your body is going into essentially a recession, where it's going into some time of stress, inflammation, sickness, all those things, your body can actually retain things that it vitally needs to survive. And cholesterol is actually one of those things. And so a lot of times elevated cholesterol isn't exactly the result of eating your beef, all those things. It's never the result of that. Can it push things up a little higher? Yes. But does that mean that's the root of why it's out of the normal range? No. Typically it's a insulin issue or it's some sort of inflammatory issue.
Yeah.
Cholesterol is found in every single cell membrane in our body.
Yep.
It is the precursor to things like bile salts, your sex hormones, stress hormones, cortisol, as well as a hormone called aldosterone, which in your kidneys allows you to reabsorb things that your body indiscriminately removes through the kidneys. And so it's important for hormone health. It's important for cell membrane integrity. It's important for a lot of different things. And the best way to get it is through your good animal fats. Your butter, organic grass-fed butter, your ghee, beef fat, tallow, your bacon, pork, sausage. I mean, all the things that have good animal fats in it, that's where you're going to get that stuff from. Not only is it essential for your body's health, but it's also, it tastes good. It's calorically dense. It tastes good. Fat makes food taste better. Helps make flavors more intense. So there's not really a downside, in my opinion. Whenever I tell people to eat more meat, there's either the people that are like, I don't know, it's gonna mess with my blood work. But then there's the other people that are like, man, if this doctor's telling me to eat more beef and more meats, heck, I love that stuff. I'm gonna go. And that's how I feel about it. It's people didn't start having issues in their health to the extent that they do now with the obesity and insulin issues and chronic autoimmune diseases and all this stuff until relatively recently in the timeline of the human race. So why is that? I think it's our food. We've kind of fallen away from eating whole foods, meats and vegetables. And so meats, for the sake of your fat, super important for essentially the cholesterol component, as well as, like you said, the arachidonic acid component.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, that's absolutely huge. And, you mentioned cholesterol, and real quick, we've talked about this before, but essentially to the listener, it's really important to understand that the total cholesterol is just a little bit of just like its surface level. You want to look at the breakdown between the HDL, LDL. You want to look at the different ratios there. And understanding that LDL, which is considered the bad cholesterol, is actually made by your own body in response to oxidative stress. So when we talk about, like Dr. Tim mentioned, the inflammation that will drive up cholesterol, what we're talking about is that oxidative stress that your body has to produce antioxidants. And when your body's running low on antioxidants, essentially, your body will create more LDL to try to protect the endothelial lining of your blood vessels. And so what increases oxidative stress? Well, all the things that we talk about, all the root issues, the infections, the obviously bad nutrition, right? So having all the high sugars and high carbs, those things are really going to drive those issues, high insulin, those types of things. So just wanted to mention that other fats that are great. Avocados are awesome, different nuts. Now, if you are going to eat nuts, if you're going to snack on those, you want to make sure they're not coated in the vegetable oils, the seed oils. Those are just going to be a source of inflammation. Also, obviously like olive oil, coconut oil. Dr. Tim mentioned the animal meats and so forth. And then obviously eggs are going to be great as well. So I think those are pretty much the main ones. I'm sure there's some other ones as well, but those are pretty much it. Carbs. Let's talk about carbs, Dr. Tim. When you think about carbs, what's important about carbs that we should kind of be thinking about?
Key word that I like to use is complex.
Mm.
So simple carbs tend to be high in their glycemic index. So the glycemic index is the effect that carbs will have on your blood sugar over time. And so simple carbs tend to have a higher glycemic index, which means that they will spike blood sugar faster because they are broken down a lot faster. And so for the sake of not spiking blood sugar and driving insulin, simple carbs tend to be less good or worse. Complex carbs like oats, good oats, or even like sweet potatoes, um, all things that are complex carbs tend to do better as far as the glycemic index goes. That's not to say that simple carbs are the worst thing in the world. If you were to eat, say, like a white potato, I don't inherently find there to be a whole lot wrong with that. Potatoes are high, super high, super high in potassium, higher than bananas. Most people think bananas are like the highest thing in potassium. Potatoes have a ton of potassium in them. They're great for other micronutrients in addition to, um, the calories that they provide. So, but with the more simple carbs, I guess what I'll really harp on is the more simple carbs that you're eating, even if they are whole food based, the more protein and fat you have to make sure that you're having with them to blunt that blood sugar spike. And so
Right.
the ratio of eating these things in combination is a lot of times where issues arise, where if you eat carbs alone, that's going to drive blood sugar increase, which can drive insulin, and it'll cause blood sugar to go up and then come down, and you could require stress hormones to prop things back up. It's this big cycle where even if you eat the same exact thing, say you eat a white potato by itself, that's going to cause a blood sugar spike. Now, if you have it with, say, your steak with some butter and things like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have the same bad effect with insulin. It's because all the other things are with it to blunt that blood sugar spike and allow it to digest over time. And so when it comes to carbs, yes, try to eat more vegetable-based carbs where they come from, your starchy vegetables, your fruits, various squashes, things like that, or even like whole grain rice, oats. All those things are great. They're great in my opinion. But it's always important to understand the things that are higher and more dense in carbs. Um, Eating your protein and fat with them is super important. Now, even if it's not especially heavy I'm sorry, even if it's not especially dense in carbs, like some fruits or even like an orange, I don't necessarily ever really encourage too many people to eat just an orange away from a meal anyway, because there's not really much to gain there. You could get a little bit of a blood sugar spike, and then from there, if you're looking for like a hunger fix, whenever you're hungry, your body is craving fuel, but at the same time, it's craving lasting fuel, and that's where the protein and fat comes in.
Yep.
So I always encourage eating a diverse amount of protein, fat, and carbs with your meal.
Yep. For sure, for sure. That's awesome. And to the listener, you can obviously look up like what's a list of complex carbs, simple carbs, that kind of thing. I'd recommend you do that just so you can kind of gain an understanding there. But when you think of simple carbs, those are going to be a lot of the sugars, the desserts, the things that kind of just go right into your bloodstream, spike your blood sugar, and all that stuff. Whereas the complex carbs they're going to process and digest a little bit differently and be used a little bit differently. All those foods are great. A couple of things I'll add is quinoa can be good as well, millet, different things like that. Um, and then I know we both love honey and maple syrup to put on different things, kind of use as our sweetener. That and coconut sugar are really going to be your best kind of sweeteners that are going to be healthy and have different, just good, pure sources of things. So, yeah, that's great with carbs. And obviously with carbs, it's like that's the glucose is what is going to uh, basically help produce energy in our cells, and it's the main source of energy for our brain. And so if we have blood sugar issues, which primarily stem from a protein deficiency actually, or lack of protein rather, but also if we're not getting enough carbs as well, that can lead to some of those issues. So Dr. Tim, one of the things I wanted to mention as we were just kind of talking through this is, we've talked about how we should eat, how many meals should we eat, when should we eat. We've talked about that in other episodes, but let's briefly go over it for our listener again, just to touch on it really quick. We really believe that we should be doing 3 meals a day. Those meals should be about 4 to 5 hours in between, so that your gut not only has time to process it, but also has time to cleanse through what's called the migrating motor complex. And so it's like your food processes, takes about roughly 2 hours. And then after that, your gut starts undergoing this cleansing process, which takes another roughly 2 hours. And then, of course, you can go longer, but again, that 4 to 5 hour mark is where your body should be ready to eat again. And so we don't recommend snacking. We think you should generally be cutting out snacking. And as Dr. Tim mentioned, if you are not feeling full, you want to up the protein, you want to up the fats, and that should satiate you pretty well. So that's pretty much that's kind of the base there that we always kind of build off of. So Dr. Tim, anything to add to that? If not, let's get into we'll get into some of these other topics here.
Yeah, just one last little tidbit. So I'll have patients that between meals, they'll say they're absolutely starving, but they won't eat anything. So that 4 to 5 hour mark, that's the goal. And your indicator there that you didn't eat enough in the previous meal is if you get hungry early. And that's where you have to up the protein and fat. It should not be that you are super hungry and holding out to eat. If you're super hungry, you need to eat some protein and fat to not drive stress hormones with that blood sugar being low. And so that's a very important thing that I like to add with people, that I've learned is some people, they just try to hold out for that 5 hour mark and think that snacking is a horrible thing. It shouldn't inherently be a horrible thing as long as it's a good quality protein, fat, and carb, where you're not driving your blood sugar through the roof and causing a blood sugar crash with insulin. If you're hungry, eat, and then correct it the next day by eating more protein and fat at, say, breakfast, in order to get you that 4 to 5 hours to lunch.
Sweet.
Other than that, I think we're totally good there, and should get into the next thing.
Love it. Insulin resistance. Let's talk about it. So, well, specifically intermittent fasting. So, kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but intermittent fasting, Dr. Tim, we have a lot of patients, a lot of people that come in and ask about intermittent fasting. Some of them have been doing it for a long time. I think ultimately our conclusion is there's a lot of benefits, primarily with blood sugar, and helping with insulin resistance. But at the same time, there's times, Dr. Tim, where we won't recommend intermittent fasting. We'll actually recommend against it. What kind of patient is that you generally will notice, hey, on one hand, you should do intermittent fasting, and then on the other hand, you should definitely avoid intermittent fasting? Do you have any thoughts with that? And of course, I'll jump in as well.
You reserve the right to call me contradictory to just about anybody else on the internet with this opinion. But,
let's hear it. The
you know,
people want to hear it.
It's such a fad thing now, intermittent fasting, where it's just gained so much traction online. Well, for the typical American following the SAD diet, this standard American diet, where they're overweight, metabolic syndrome, so where you have your high blood pressure, your high fasted glucose, your high LDL cholesterol, um, abdominal obesity, all those things that categorize you in the typical American, that other countries think of us as, where we're just fat and unhealthy. That is the person that will benefit from intermittent fasting. It's somebody who has insulin resistance, where your cells, think of your cells like a husband with a nagging wife, where the insulin that your body secretes is the wife nagging, and then it starts over time to fall on deaf ears of the cells, where eventually your cells, when they're bombarded with insulin all the time from constant high blood sugar, they're going to quit listening. And so your body jacks up through the roof insulin production, but at the same time, it has a lesser effect on the cells. Those are the people that intermittent fasting is more beneficial for. Now, that's not to say that it's a permanent thing. In order to increase insulin sensitivity, you can't intermittent fast to totally eliminate insulin from the equation at all to regulate blood sugar, because you're barely ever eating anything. Just this last week, I had a patient who, she had been intermittent fasting for the last 2 years straight for the most part, and her window of eating was about 6 hours. So all she ate was within a 6 hour window throughout the day. And she's gotten to the point where, she lost a lot of weight. Her insulin was doing really, really good. A1C, all that stuff. And then as of recently, it started to go back to where it was.
Mm.
Well, what does that mean? Why is that the case? Well, she's gone from the high blood sugar side all the way down to the low side, where now she has the problem of driving stress hormones through the roof. They're sputtering at that point because she's just been driving them into the ground for 2 years now. But then with that, she's not getting the proper protein and fat to regulate blood sugar properly. And so she is getting these little insulin spikes when she does eat. And the stress hormones are, as well as the insulin, are causing this up and down, up and down, up and down. And so she's getting the highs as well as the lows now. Whereas with intermittent fasting, the goal is to just get the lows and take insulin out of the equation. So to get back to your original question, the patient that should do it is those that are of that nature, the metabolic syndrome type, where high blood pressure, high glucose, high cholesterol, abdominal obesity, all those things. Patients that walk into my office, 99% of the time, that's not the case. They are not the ones that need to be intermittent fasting. I've said this on here before, where the people that come into the office, they are generally healthy. They try to do the right things. They exercise, they eat right in quotes, where they eat whole foods. They try to stay away from processed stuff. They eat vegetables, proteins, all the good stuff. But something's just still not right. And typically what's not right with them is some chronic inflammation or something going on there from God knows what that we will find out in our office. But then the other side of it is they're the low end of the spectrum. So their blood sugar is chronically low. And when it's chronically low, if they're not eating enough, what will happen is they'll eat a little bit, and then their blood sugar will come down, and then that's when cortisol props it back up. And so it's more of a stress issue. Intermittent fasting is absolutely atrocious for those with a stress issue as it relates to blood sugar. So if you are having sugar cravings, if you get hangry, if you get jittery if you don't eat, if you're waking up between the hours of like 1 and 4 a.m., if you struggle to fall asleep, there's a lot of things that point to not eating enough leading to a chronic stress issue. And those are the people that should not be intermittent fasting. And that just tends to be the clientele that walks in my office, is the people that are trying to do everything right. And I really think the issue there is that those who are trying to do everything right, they are eating good quality foods, and it's very difficult to overeat good quality foods. It's actually very difficult to eat enough.
Yeah.
That's where the processed foods, it's very easy to overeat because they're so calorically dense from all the crap in them, versus the good food it's not as calorically dense, and it has a higher volume in order to get the calories that you need to sustain yourself from one meal to the next. And so it's difficult to, eat that much steak or that much ground beef or that many vegetables. It's difficult to get the proper macronutrients to get you from point A to point B with your meals. So those who are on that lower blood sugar end, tend to be the ones that walk in the office. They tend to be the ones with low blood sugar. They tend to be the ones that intermittent fasting is not the way to go. And so I've seen it where patients have very significant issues that as long as they sort out the diet and get rid of the intermittent fasting that they think is doing them good, they're so much better by the second visit. That's like 2 weeks later. I mean, it's amazing how quickly it can sort itself out. And those are the big symptoms that, at least right now, come to the top of my head. But Dr. Joel, do you have any other symptoms that could align with that, as well as other things to add?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with the intermittent fasting is going to just be the insulin resistance. And for people that have insulin resistance, there's a couple of things that you may even have mentioned a couple of these, but essentially the abdominal obesity. So if your waist, your belly is large, it's a good sign that you have insulin resistance issues. If you eat and you get really tired after a meal, good chance you have really bad insulin resistance issues. And objectively, you can check that very easily by running a fasting glucose in a comprehensive metabolic panel. You can run a fasting insulin level, and essentially you can calculate those to get the insulin resistance score. So you multiply those by each other, and then you divide it all by 405. That score should equal 1. That's healthy. It should be less than that. As the less that it is than 1, the better. If it equals 3, that's considered type 2 diabetic levels. And I'll have patients that come in, they don't necessarily have type 2 diabetes because their fasting glucose is less than 125. But when we look at that score, their glucose might even look fine. It might even be in the normal range, but we look at insulin and it's like super high, and we do the score and they're in bad shape with insulin resistance levels up to 4 and 5 and things like that. So the intermittent fasting can be extremely beneficial for those people along with the right diet changes. But that's usually in those situations, it's not a lifelong thing. It's like, hey, we need to do this while we get your blood sugar under control. And the time that I'll have them do it for is going to be determined by their overall compliance usually. So if they're really compliant, I mean, I might only have them do some intermittent fasting stuff for a couple of weeks just to get things really under control, maybe a month or two. But we're not talking a super long time with that. So that's the only other thing I would add. And I think one thing that we wanted to touch on as well was just for women, if you're intermittent fasting or fasting in general, when should you do that based on your hormones, based on your cycle? And essentially, I'll kind of elaborate a lot of the things that Dr. Mindy Pelz teaches a lot. So Dr. Mindy, Mindy, Pelz, Pelz. You can look her up. I think she has a book. It's called How to Fast Like a Woman. But essentially, what she talks about is, we know that there's an importance for progesterone. We know there's an importance of good, healthy levels of glucose, and that's where Dr. Tim, really went home on the complex carbs. We need good complex carbs that help support progesterone. So essentially with your cycle, whenever progesterone needs support, like right after ovulation, around days 14 to 17, 18, that kind of thing. And then basically the week before your period is when you really want to have complex carbs in your nutrition with just about every meal. It doesn't need to necessarily be a lot, but those complex carbs, the sweet potatoes, the quinoa, things like that, to support progesterone. You don't want to fast during those times. And intermittent fasting during those times is also going to be a little bit less recommended there. So for fasting for women, you want to do that after your period, between that and between kind of ovulation. It's a great time and a healthy time to fast. It's not going to mess with your hormones. So yeah. So Dr. Tim, anything else to add to that? Otherwise, I'm curious about your take on calories and caloric intake.
Not much. Just pay attention to the signs and symptoms that we kind of talked about. If you feel tired after you eat, if you're hungry before meals, between meals, like crazy, you're not making it 5 hours. If you are waking up throughout the night, if you get hangry if you don't eat, if you have sugar cravings, all those things point to insulin as well as low blood sugar issues. And so
For sure.
pay close attention to those. And if you do have those issues, go ahead and listen to our first and second podcasts. Those are absolutely huge when it comes to helping you iron that out on your own. Because if that is the root of your health issue, you can fix that like that. And it doesn't take that much. It just takes eating properly.
For sure. Dr. Tim, how many calories is enough for people? And are calories really, really important when it comes to losing weight?
They are. They are. There's this argument that for the most part, I mean, I don't know if I will say for the most part, but essentially thermodynamics, calories in versus calories out, you have to lose weight at some point. Well, our bodies are a bit more dynamic than just simple equation of in versus out. There
Right.
is this wonderful thing that we have called our thyroid gland, where when you are chronically stressed or chronically inflamed or have autoimmune conditions or whatever it is, your thyroid will downregulate.
Hmm.
And so if you are chronically within this, survival state where you're sick chronically with inflammation, or if you're just chronically not eating enough, your body goes, whoa, we're in a time of famine. I need to conserve resources. And so say your body needed 2,500 calories a day for a while, and that was your resting state. Well, over time, you got stressed, you started skipping lunch, and you've kind of fallen your way down to it being like 1,800 a day. Well, at that point, your body's going to try to utilize what you're giving it and maintain where you're at and conserve resources. And so a lot of times at that point, people will start to gain weight. And they're like, wait, I'm not eating as much. Why is that? Well, your body is shifting from I'm trying to burn energy because I have a lot of surplus going on to I don't have enough. So I'm going to try to hold on to it. And so it's a bit more dynamic than just calories in versus calories out. And so um, often, I'll have women come to the office. They're like, man, I've decreased my calories so much. I can't even think of eating any less at this point, and I'm exercising 5 days a week. Why am I not losing weight? Well, there's this strategy to go about this where it's used by bodybuilders where post competition, in order to work your way back up to your body's normal thrival resting state, your homeostatic range, it's reverse dieting, where say you work yourself down to even as low as 1,000 calories a day, for example, you need to push it up to 1,500 calories a day, while of course dealing with the underlying inflammatory things. Make sure you're getting good protein and fat with that, and not just slamming carbs. So then that way you're satiating yourself. And then from there, after you've hung out there for 2 weeks or so, bump it up to say 2,000 again, and slowly work your way back up to where eventually your body's going to reach the point where it goes, whoa, we have enough resources now. I don't have to hold on to so much stuff anymore. And then at that point, energy will resume, your thyroid will upregulate again, and you'll feel like exercising. You'll feel like you're actually burning something, and you won't feel so bogged down. And so back to, I guess, your original question with calories and are they important? They're super important for each person to figure out for themselves, I would say. And so you have to pay attention to your signs and symptoms of, are you erring on that hangry side or tired after you eat? All those things. Those are indicators that, if you're hungry between meals before that 5 hours, you have not had enough calories worth of protein and fat between meals. If you feel tired after you eat, you've had too many calories worth of carbs, and you need to dial that back the next day at that same meal. And then also, every person's different. So like you said, 100 grams of protein a day, for women, that's a good baseline to go off of. But at the same time, you might have, a woman who's 6 foot tall and closer to 200 pounds at a good healthy weight. You could also have a woman that walks in and she's 4'11" and 95 pounds, and that's a good weight for her. It all is a factor of essentially size. And so if you have somebody who's just naturally a larger person, taller, bigger in stature, they will need more protein and more fat inherently. Men tend to require a little bit more because they are on average larger.
Right.
And so I don't necessarily say, hey, you need to strive for this many calories per day, because it's so much more dynamic than that.
Yeah.
It's pay attention to how you feel relative to each meal, and this
Yeah.
is how you should feel throughout the day. And then with that, you will automatically find a good point of caloric density or caloric intake for the day for yourself. And so, the number that we always grow up hearing with, the My Plate or food pyramid, all that stuff is 2,000 calories a day. And that's, fine and dandy, but people are so diverse in their size and their requirements based on activity level, all those things. And so it just takes fine tuning it to yourself. Our patients tend to come and see us for the sake of, well, one, they need to know how to fix their problems, but at the same time, to be a student of better health. And the diet stuff is absolutely huge when it comes to the education aspect of what we cover in our office, because it isn't something that we can just take somebody through and say these are exactly the calories that you specifically need, because it's not exactly the most measurable thing. Yeah, of course, we could do various BMR, basal metabolic rate tests, and things like that, but it makes more sense for patients to learn what essentially makes them tick. So,
Well said. Well said.
Everything.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Dr. Tim, I think this has been great. Here's what I'm thinking. Let's turn this next one into a part 2. Let's go through this next one, this next episode, talking primarily about the things that we should be avoiding. And then we'll also go through kind of our own nutrition and so forth. Does that sound all right to you, Tim?
Sounds great. I know, yeah. You got some stuff to get to today. So
yeah, we got to get going.
Longer than we thought we would on this one. So
it's good. We always got lots to talk about, and that's one of the things I love about hanging out with you, Dr. Tim. So always lots to share, a lot of encouragement, value to share. So I appreciate it. So Dr. Tim, let's wrap this up. Where can people find you, and how can they find you?
So I'm Dr. Tim Augustiniak. I practice in Bentonville, Arkansas. My practice is called Flourish Functional Wellness Center. You can find me online. If you just search up Dr. Tim Augustiniak, I typically pop up with my Google business listing. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, you name it, all the stuff. Just search up Dr. Tim Augustiniak and should come right on up. If you have or want to find any resources, free resources on, say, my website, I do have a lot of health articles where we talk about all sorts of things that we cover on the podcast. And of course, all my contact info is on there. You can reach out, give us suggestions for future podcasts. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, because although we feel that we cover things well, we don't have a live audience to, raise their hand and provide questions in real time. So if anybody's wondering anything additional, feel free to reach out to both me as well as Dr. Joel through our website or whatever means you can find.
Yeah, definitely would love to connect with you all. Obviously, we do this podcast to help the listeners, to help people just with health and things like that. And obviously, we have a lot of our time and our every week dedicated towards our clinics and towards our practices to help patients there. But we'd love to connect with you and help you guys along the way. So yeah, I'm Dr. Joel Miller, located just outside Dallas, Texas. And my practice name is Freedom Health and Wellness. You can look me up online. It's just drjoelmiller.com. You can find me on the different socials, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, all that fun stuff. Would love to connect with you guys. Feel free to check those things out. And again, we're here to help. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this one. We're going to come back with part 2 of nutrition. We're going to do probably like a part 3 of nutrition as well. It's primarily going through diets. We might even squeeze that into the next one. We'll kind of talk about that. And then we've got some other good ones coming up. We're going to, at some point here, we're going to go through Lyme. That's a big one, but we want to make sure that's a good one for you guys. And then we're also going to go through a number of other things. We're going to do one for just crunchy parents, the crunchy moms, and all about how to take care of your kids, how to help your kids be as healthy as possible. And we're going to go through a bunch of other stuff too. So we're excited. Let us know if you have any questions. Let us know if there's any things you want us to cover, and we'll gladly consider them. Dr. Tim, thanks so much. Keep killing it. Proud of you. Love you, dude. Listeners, we'll see you guys in the next one.